So in the scene, we've got a few shapes. We've got a cube, we've got a sphere, we've got a torus, and we've got a capsule. So we just added a simple color dividing shader that splits this object into black and white. And yeah, these three objects here, the capsule, the sphere, and the torus, they've got a single simple shader. But the cube's a bit more complex. It's got its own shader. And today we'll just be going through how we did that. So as you can see in this scene, we've just got a simple sphere. We're gonna start by just adding a shader. In the surface material override, we're gonna add a shader. And we're just gonna make that a shader material and just tap new shader over here. And let's just name it whatever we want. I'm gonna call mine half. And make sure it's a spatial shader. And now let's create. And we need a few parts to make the shader we're looking for. First, you need to know how to change the color of the material of the shader. We just need to know how to change the color of the shader. So let's start by changing the current color. So to change the color, we'll need to change the albedo, and we'll need to make it a vector 3. And let's make this 0.0, and this should make it black. And don't forget the semicolon. And let's just wait. And as you can see, it's black now. And let's just go back to the format of the way we wrote this vector 3. And basically a simpler way to understand what we just did go is to make another vector 3, and we can just make it 0 comma 0 point 0 point 0 comma 0 point 0 and semicolon at the end. So this is the same thing as this. This is the same thing, it's just the previous way was just an easier way of writing that down. For the second part, we need to understand what the UV is. The UV is basically just the shader's coordinates mapped onto the mesh. Think of it as a graph that represents every pixel on a mesh. Basically, if we put a mark on this part of the graph, it'll appear on that part of the mesh. And if we use this, it'll be pretty easy to divide the mesh in two and split it by different materials. Let's just start by making the black color its own variable. So let's call it COL, make the variable type vec3, and so let's make it equal to this black color. And now let's just replace that. And now this looks much better. It looks we can use the space to fit in many more lines of code and just mess around with the color. Okay, to access UV in Godot, you just need to type capital U and V. Alright, but to actually use it, let's just make ourselves a variable. Let's make a vec2 and let's make it equal. Let's call it D and let's make it equal to this. Now, planning to cut it down the middle vertically. So we need to mess around with the x coordinate. Okay. Okay. So let's make another function. Let's make it return a float and let's call it half. We'll plug our UV into it, so let's make the parameter vec2 and let's call it P. And I'll use our brackets. And let's make the function return 1. Okay, semicolon. Okay, let's plug our d into the half. D semicolon. Okay, so nothing really changes. So this function returns a float. So let's use this float by making a variable. Let's call this result, and let's make it equal result, and let's make it equal to that. Okay, so now let's make an if statement. So let's say if the result is greater than 1, if the result is greater than 1, no, if the result is smaller than 1, the color variable should be equal to 1.0 comma 1.0 comma 1.0, which is white. Right now you can see everything is black because we haven't done anything in the function. Alright, so let's actually do something in the function. So now let's say first let's move p to the middle. Let's move p to the middle by p equals p minus fic 2 0.5, the center of the map. Now let's just actually make stuff right. So we mentioned before that we're gonna split it in half using the x value. So if the x value, if p dot x is less than 0.0, if p dot x is less than 0.0, return -1.0, -1.0, semicolon. And now as you can see, half of the cubes, half of the cubes white and half of the cubes black. And it's just that simple. So now let's just let's just change up the mesh. This works for a bunch of meshes. It works for the capsule mesh. It works for the torus mesh. But the funny thing is it doesn't work for the box mesh. And we'll explain it in the next video why this doesn't work for the box mesh and how to actually make a box mesh. Half a box mesh. But you can just play around with this simple shader and make it your own.